All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Hurricane Preparedness with Everbridge Nixle. My name is Mitch, and I'll be moderating this session. So before we hear from our speakers, just a few housekeeping items. You can ask questions for our presenters at any time throughout the webinar by typing them into the questions panel. Our presenters will answer everyone's questions at the end of the session. If you have any questions that are not answered during the webinar, we'll make sure to have someone follow up and answer those questions for you afterwards. This webinar will be recorded, and I will be sending out an email with both a recording of the webinar as well as the slides used shortly after the webinar. And of course, if you'd like to follow us on Twitter, you can follow @Nixle and tweet at us using #Nixle. So our speakers today are Captain James Ryan of the South Brunswick Police Department and Jim Gata, the Director of Community Engagement here at Everbridge Nixle. So, Captain Ryan, I will give you a presentation.
In developing some of your communication strategies for the upcoming hurricane season.
Hey, sorry, Captain Ryan.
Sure.
I'm sorry, I had you muted. Can you restart? Sorry.
Sure.
Nice.
I just want to share some of our experiences from dealing with some of the hurricanes over the last couple of years, Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Irene specifically. And when you're thinking about developing your communication plans for the upcoming hurricane season, to think about all the components that have changed from last year or previous years that you've dealt with these storms. Let's see here. So a little bit about myself. I'm a police captain in South Brunswick. I'm a lead instructor for New Jersey State Chiefs of Police on crisis communication. I have 20 years of public information officer experience. I graduated FBI National Academy. I am an adjunct professor and I also lecture at different universities about law enforcement topics and communication strategies in crisis. A little about the community we're going to speak about today, South Brunswick Township, where I serve. It's located directly between New York City and Philadelphia. It's 42 square miles and with a daytime population of 100,000. It has major highways going through from I-95, New Jersey Turnpike, US Route 1, Route 130, and Route 27. It also has a major northeast corridor that runs through the community. What's interesting about how hurricanes impacted our community is the fact that we're not typically right on the ocean. We're 39 miles inland. And sometimes with preparedness, we're not sure about how far we have to worry about it, but our experience shows that even if you're well inland, you may have major impacts from these storms. We're 16 miles off the Raritan Bay, which during Hurricane Sandy flooded tremendously. We have 84 sworn officers at South Brunswick Police Department, 78,000 calls a year. We're both nationally and state accredited, and our chief is Chief Raymond Hayduka. So the focus of the presentation today is more about the impacts from Hurricane Sandy on New Jersey and also the impacts into our community and what our communication strategies were during it and what lessons we've learned. One of the things that the cornerstones for when we're developing our communication strategies, we always think about the fact that if we're saying it but no one's hearing it because we're using a wrong platform, then it's not effective. And in the bottom there, in the time of crisis, people want to know more that you care than they know what you know. What happened in Hurricane Sandy was we couldn't restore the power to many communities, but the fact that we were aware they had that impact, the fact that they're giving out readily information, made us more the source for accurate information on a daily basis. Each event and our agency's experience helps shapes us. So we look back at our previous communication plans and try to evaluate how we do it differently. The top left picture is Hurricane Irene, and one lesson learned there was as far as power outages, how we had to have backup plans and backup locations, and using Nixle to be able to get that information out, even if our local establishment had lost all power. When you're coming up with your communication plans, you have to think about how technology's changed over the past couple of years, whether it be Twitter or different platforms or Instagram or Facebook or all the different platforms that we can communicate with. How is our population best served and how can we get out there? From emergency radio communications to Twitter messages to Nixle. So back in 2012, when the storm started to impact, or started to think it was going to impact, we became aware of a unique feature of the fact that the hurricane would come into the Northeast. It's been a while since hurricanes had a major impact on the Northeast, and this storm showed that it was going to come our way at least 8 days in advance. So we want to make sure that we developed our communication plan to accommodate all the different needs we'd have to go in the coming days. When we want to do any communication plan, you want to make sure you develop both push and pull technologies. What's going to allow the public to get the information on a readily basis, and where can they pull it down, and where can you push it out? And by having it established in advance of the storm, it allowed us to be better prepared. We'd already established that Nixle was our primary method for emergency communication, but we already had Twitter and other platforms ready to go as well. One of the things that we learned from the storm, and as it goes on, if you rely primarily on your city or township's website as a source of information, if a critical incident should happen, there's a good chance that your infrastructure will collapse. If the national spectrum's active shooter or something in your community, that everyone from around the world would flood your website and would bring it to collapse. So you have to have multiple platforms ready to go and to develop that information. Just on a statewide perspective, 6 schools completely destroyed by Sandy, 7 million people lost power, 346,000 homes were damaged, 185,000 was the number of businesses in New Jersey impacted, and 116,000 number of New Jerseyans evacuated, displaced. In addition, there was 43 deaths. And the reason I give you the scope on a statewide is because we came to realize that because it was such a wide-scale damage, that we were not going to get any assistance. We had to be self-sufficient with providing our public with information and are getting it through the storm. We're located squarely between the New York and Philadelphia media markets, so the impact here in our community was not going to be televised or broadcast. They were focused on bigger areas, more towards the ocean to coastline. Tier 1 was mainly the areas that were affected from damage, the high winds, the no power for extensive period of time. That was our community. Tier 2 was total destructions, which were located by the shoreline. Those communities, many were completely devastated. And that's where most of the media attention, most of the news coverage, and most of the information came from. So a community like ours in a Tier 1, if we didn't have a communication plan ready, our residents would have been in the dark as to what was happening here. What we want to do to define ourselves as being the accurate with information is we want to make sure that we got that information out in advance of the storm. At least 5 days in advance, we sent out our first initial warnings that we had a potentially dangerous storm head our way and is going to impact. And again, in the Southeast, I know it's a very common theme where they hurricane preparedness, but in the Northeast, having this significant storm come in late October was unusual. And therefore, we had to let all the residents, even our community that was 40 miles inland, be prepared for what might happen. On Sunday, October 28th, we set up a whole state of emergency, limited travel throughout the whole area. Schools were closed and emergency operations centers, both locally, county, and state, went into operation. By the 29th, when the storm struck, its impact was devastating in the fact that the high winds took down much of our infrastructure and at one point rendered the entire community without power. The entire state had 2.6 million people without power at the height of the storm. We were able to send out with the assistance of Nixle using our phone. We called them and they were able to help us send it out, is the large-scale power outage. We were able to let all the residents know, yes, you lost power in your home. The city and township is aware of it, and we're making sure that we're working on it. This will at least let everyone know that it wasn't isolated to their power box or their street. It was a statewide issue, and we were working on it. The infrastructure picture here just shows that all the utility poles had come down and fall down the road. We realized within the first couple hours, not only was it a significant storm, but to get back up to speed was going to take us days and weeks ahead of us. We then devised a plan of being able to send out regular messages to be able to provide this community with not only where the power was out, but as the coming days when school was closed, what would happen as far as food and fuel. The Northeast, again, this is a rare event that would happen, but we established ourselves with our communication plan that we provide them with the best and most accurate information. But one of the challenges we also faced with the large-scale infrastructure and the high winds and the trees coming down was we had emergency services were taxed. Our resources were limited because it's overwhelmed all the resources from the trees coming down on vehicles, injuries, and fires. So we realized that our services were tested for a while, and the best way we get our information to all our residents was through our Nixle program. In the 10 days without power, on top of having a hurricane, we also had a snowstorm, and that also put us in a real difficult position. We also had tremendous fuel shortages. Many people had heard the warnings but not adjusted their lifestyles at all. So people were without fuel. Many gas stations had no power to pump the fuel. So we became critical that we get information as to what gas stations were open, where people could get food, where people could get ATM and money. And then we also had to communicate the difficulties of our community, the travel restrictions. So located between Philadelphia and New York, many people who commuted on a daily basis into New York City were coming from the Philadelphia suburbs, and their communities did not have the devastation that we had. So therefore, they'd start their commute believing that it'd be a normal commute, only to find that many of the highways they'd use were blocked. And so in providing that information, we realized it wasn't just coming to our local residents, but it was coming to people who transferred around our communities during the storm. Again, this is just pictures of the magnitude of some of the trees that fell, and in of itself probably would not be that significant, but when you have a large scale over the whole 42 square miles, it's going to take times, weeks to be able to repair and open these highways. Some even landed in the law enforcement. The dangers of the storm were paramount in the first couple of hours. Those trees snapped, even landing on a police car. The highways and infrastructure here, as we've talked about, was just totally taken out of service. There was no way that we were going to be able to use the highways for the thousands of people who commuted between Philadelphia and New York on a daily basis to be able to come through the community. When we provide these updates, it became essential that we provide accurate information. We knew that the people were relying on us for information, so we want to make sure even the basic necessities of where gas was, where food was open. Some parts of the community had no power. Some parts slowly got some power back. So we want to make sure that we told the residents where it was coming back to and where they could get food and fuel. We also want to update those residents about how power was being restored. And even though it was a utility company's responsibility to update the power maps and everything, the local community and residents turned to us to figure out what we knew and when we knew it. And so we shared with them how we got power restored and where power was becoming restored. It also, in hindsight, showed residents who had evacuated the area or state and were in other places such as Pennsylvania or Ohio were able to keep up to date on what was going on back in their community and decide when to come back home. So this information was valuable for them. As the highways became more of an issue, we had to make sure that we let the people know what was available and what was not available. And providing timely information made us more the essential source for information. We also, this storm fell right before Halloween, and with the utility lines down and with the trees down, it became almost impossible. So we had to actually, one of the most unpopular decisions, announce that Halloween is being postponed or canceled at this point in time. Because unless an official message is sent out, our concern was that people would still try to trick or treat or something like that. So we made sure that we were the official information source for anything that was going on. Post-storm, we realized that communication was the key. People had limited accurate information. Even here in our Emergency Operations Center, when the power went out, we were in the dark about the fact that New York City's impact, or the subways were flooded in New York City, or Lower Manhattan was flooded. But most of the major news and the national news networks were all covering that. People from around the country and around the world knew more about our surroundings than we did, but we were able to provide accurate information to our residents about our local community, and that was key. We ended up sending out 80 messages during the 7 days of the initial response, and we received over 803 emails. A lot of those messages and emails received a lot of positive feedback we have. We had residents in this email, a resident just talks about the fact that our reports and our information we provided was a lifeline because they had no idea. Being caught between two major metropolitan areas, they were not getting the information they needed to know about their local community, and their police department was able to provide that information. Again, these emails and everything later on became very valuable as local governing bodies gave praise to the fact that we responded and how we were able to do this so effectively. One of the things that we all lessons learned out of here is law enforcement agencies and Office of Emergency Managers around the area who did not have a communication plan were heavily criticized. They were believed that, you know, in time of crisis, their local governing body, they want a response to what's going on in their community. And so a lot of people went to develop Nixle and develop Nixle communication plans on a regular basis. And this is a picture of a screenshot of a newspaper article when the snowstorm hit, and everyone talked about communication was the key. We also learned during this whole response that there was a lot of partners out there that we could have worked with. I traveled to the Google Crisis Response Center in New York City about 2 months afterwards to take an evaluation of where we were successful and where it could improve upon. And what we learned was that there's other resources out there. There was a local high school group who had actually, in their off time, was monitoring different fuel stations and gas stations, and they created a gas map so that we could have linked to and try to work with. And so forming some of these partnerships in advance of a storm, who could help us, where they could get information. In one case, it was told about up in North Jersey of Hoboken where it was flooded, and one of the residents had evacuated to the Pittsburgh area. Well, because he was evacuated, he could see accurate information about flooding conditions, and he created a whole map so different residents could log on and get one screenshot of what actually was happening in their community from a screenshot. So it kind of opened our eyes to the fact that we need other partners in times. We can't rely on all the police, fire, and EMS will be tied up with a lot of work. And if there are other partners that we can get to and have assistance from, we should make those partners before the storm. Some of the lessons learned were predefined contingencies. Hurricane Irene, which happened a year earlier, had told us to make sure that we made contingencies for power loss and multiple different sites being able to communicate our message out from. Here we learned about different platforms we need to use. At one point when power was restored to certain parts of the town, we indicated that we would have power strips established at the local library for people who needed a charge device. What we were amazed about is after sending out Nixle, the next morning we had over 100 people plugging in their devices. The smartphones were essential. They were ready to power up and get back on and move forward. Take forecasts seriously. You know, there's too often where the public will be lulled into the sense that it's not going to happen. And in the Northeast, I'd have to say Hurricane Sandy, we had not seen anything like that in a number of decades. So there was the cars were not fueled, food was not stocked up, and to realize the importance of these forecasts and make sure that you, as a communication person from your agency, are putting out accurate information. Update your data before the event occurs. Make sure your partners, make sure the communication people you're going to work with. In this case, we had to work with local hospitals, school districts, even religious institutions, and make sure we know who those PIOs are, what their phone numbers are, how we get in touch with them on a 24-hour basis, and what we can do to improve the communication in the crisis. Spring into action quickly. Make sure that you become the authority that people are getting information from. Whether you're using your Twitter, your Facebook, your Nixle, whatever other platform you're using, make sure you're using it and putting out messages in advance of the storm and when the storm hits so people know to turn to you. Then clear, simple, and frequent communications. One of the evaluations we took back and looked at and thought we could have done better was the fact that we should have set up a time frame for when we were sending out messages. If it was going to be 8 a.m., noon time, and 4 p.m., it probably would have been more consistent so that residents who had limited power and wanted to power up a device could know that at noontime they get their next update. So making sure that you send 3 to 4 messages, make sure it's a clear time frame. You can broadcast a message whenever it's urgent, but if people have limited power and they can only power it up for a certain time period, they need to know when to expect that message and tailor your message to your medium. If you have a medium such as Twitter, you know it's more limited and it's not going to get it, but you need to make sure that people capture what you want to say. So if that picture shows a tree down across the road, that's probably better than me sending out some kind of news release saying that roads are closed. That picture shows exactly what it is. Make sure you have multiple levels of communication platforms, Nixle, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and whatever else you use, but don't rely on one sole source. Again, if your city or township website is the way you primarily get your message out, in times of crisis, there's a good chance it will crash. And don't panic. Prepare for the worst and hope for the best. You are the experts in your area. When a crisis happens, you have the most accurate information at the time. It will evolve. But just by simply communicating out to the public that you care, you're concerned, and you're doing your best to get that information will be all they need to know in the time of crisis. Mitch, I think that's back to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. So I'm actually going to give it over to Jim Goddard right now. And you can present.
Great. Thanks, Mitch. Perfect. Let me bring this over. Can everyone see my full screen?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, perfect. Thanks. Thank you, Mitch. Thanks, Captain Ryan. Thank you, everyone, for joining us on this call. My name is Jim Gata. I work with Nixle. I work with many agencies throughout the country, of which there's over 9,000 public safety agencies, police, fire, emergency management, municipalities that use our services. So I wanted to go over some of the details, some of the nuts and bolts of those services. But at the same time, I did want to just highlight a couple of takeaways from Captain Ryan's presentation, which I really think hits home with what a lot of us try to do day to day, do with better communication with our residents. Number one is the absolute importance of getting the word out ahead of time. Captain Ryan mentioned, kind of making sure the numbers in your system are updated, making sure that you sort of laid that foundation, building your subscribership before you need to reach them with maybe less critical information day to day or week to week, so people know that there is this avenue of communication between their police department or their city and themselves, their families. And in the case of South Brunswick in particular, South Brunswick has one of the higher opt-in rates of all of our Nixle clients because Captain Ryan and his colleagues do such a great job getting information out before the Sandys hit, before the Irenes hit. So you see those numbers start to go up there. The second point, before I kind of move to the next slide, and I'm only going to take 10 minutes of your time for my part of this presentation. The second thing that I really wanted to highlight that Captain Ryan talked about was multimodal communication, because in a crisis, in a storm, in any sort of an incident, one path of communication is bound to go down, right? So maybe you might not be able to send out an email, or your residents can't check the web, or they can't stay up to date on social media with you. So making sure that you have all of that covered is great. Send out a text, send out an email, post your message to the web. Make sure that it feeds to the Nixle app if you're using Nixle to send out your voice, your information. In many cases, send out a voice call to landlines. Post to social media simultaneously. So anything that you can do to hit all of those modes of communication, all of which are supported by Nixle, you're going to really exponentially increase your chance of getting your message out to more people. Specifically with the Nixle system, for those on the call who aren't familiar with it, those on the call who do use Nixle, this may be more of just a refresher. Residents have 5 ways to sign up to receive your notification. I'm going to focus mostly on number 2 and number 3, because those are the most popular ways that folks opt into Nixle. That's by mobile opt-in, texting their zip code or texting a keyword. But anyone can sign up online. They can go to your website and fill out what we refer to as a registration widget, where they can download the app. But I do want to talk about zip code opt-in and keyword opt-in. I believe in the case of South Brunswick, as with many of our clients, zip code opt-in is the most popular way of signing up to receive your messages. So if you're not familiar with the system, all you need to do is pull out your phone and text your zip code to the number 888-777. If you text your zip to 888-777, you are going to automatically be subscribed to receive text messages from any public safety agency in your area that has jurisdiction over that zip code. So it may be at a city level, at a county level, at a state level. I'll give you an example. In LA, LA County Sheriff uses Nixle, as do many municipalities within that county. So if you lived in Arcadia and you texted your zip code, not only would you be opted into Arcadia PD, you would also be opted into LA County Sheriff's notifications, as well as California State Police. Yes.
Jim, just your slides aren't advancing right now. I think you might be sharing the wrong screen. That's possible?
Oh, I'm sorry.
There you go. No, you're good now.
Well, you know what? I want to share them full screen. I apologize.
It's okay. You're good now.
But are you seeing it full screen?
I can see it. It's fine.
Okay, great. Sorry, everyone, for that. I didn't realize it was not advancing. I'm just going to go back a couple slides. So essentially what I said is number 2 and number 3 is the most common way for folks to opt into the system by texting their zip code or texting a keyword, although there are other ways like the app and as well as online. And I'm basically have been focusing on number 2 and number 3. And we talked about the zip code opt-in and the example of LA County. Another example, actually a little closer to home with this presentation, is in South Brunswick, New Jersey, where Jim Ryan is captain at the police department. If someone living in South Brunswick, New Jersey were to text their zip code to 888-777, they would be opted into the police department. They would be opted into Middlesex County's notifications, and they would be opted in to receive notifications from New Jersey State Police as well. So one opt-in, multiple subscriptions. That's sort of the most popular way to opt into Nixle notifications through this shared network. Another way that you can do it as well is to create a keyword. So you can have people always to the number 888-777. You can set up a specific keyword, and I'm going to give you an example of one with a weather incident that happened a few months back where someone set up a keyword. But along with the zip code, you can set it up for, again, day-to-day evergreen notifications. Hey, text, SBPD to 888-777 if you want to receive notifications from South Brunswick PD or LAPD, or if there's an event going on, Memorial Day, July 4th, Labor Day, and you want to do some crowd control notifications for the various events and first aid tents, you can do that. You can do that as well. Or for the purpose of our conversation here, more dire circumstances like a Hurricane Sandy. I will give you a quick walkthrough online of how to create that, but it's very simple. Once you go into your Nixle system, you just name it, you create a group, assign it a unique keyword. Once you assign it that keyword, it is live, it's active. Anyone in the country can opt into that keyword, even if they don't live in your area, but maybe work there or are vacationing there or have a relative there. So they can have as many subscriptions as they want. One of our clients, excuse me, who did set up a keyword was the state of Florida. So Hurricane Matthew back in October of last year, it had barreled through the Bahamas. It was making its way up the southeastern United States, Florida to North Carolina. Everyone along that stretch was, keeping a close eye on the track of the storm. As Captain Ryan said, hoping for the best, but naturally expecting the worst. So the Florida's Division of Emergency Management, they were getting ready behind the scenes, preparing for the heavy gusts, the storm surges. They needed to keep people in the know, just like what happened with Sandy in South Brunswick. As the winds whipped up and the rains, down power lines, uprooted trees, flooding of low-lying areas. So what they essentially did was they created the keyword FL Prepares, and they got that word out one day ahead of the storm. I mean, it was pretty quick action. They knew they needed to get a lot of eyeballs on messages that could be very much, saving life and limb and property. So Governor Scott of Florida, at one of his news conferences, told everyone, hey, text FL Prepares to 888-777. We're going to send you information as it becomes available to us. So folks, up and down the eastern seaboard of Florida who saw that message, they started opting in, and there was a very quick turnaround of a public awareness campaign through social media, through Twitter and Facebook. The local press picked up on it and reported it to their viewers and their readers. Hey, everyone, text FL Prepares to 888-777. We're going to send various messages, but texting is when it comes down to it, a very efficient way, and texting is one of the cell towers are one of the last things that, could go down before, utility poles and wires might cut out your electricity and your email. So folks who are watching that, they responded en masse. They had, in less than 24 hours, just over 362,000 people opted in one day to receive those notifications. And over the course of that week or so, the state reached nearly 6 million, sent nearly 6 million messages out to those opt-ins. In total, I think if we get specific to the numbers, they sent out about 18 alerts over the course of that first weekend to those 362,000 people. And those alerts were, everything from the storm's progress, recovery information, tips for folks who've lost power to their home and maybe made it impossible to, watch news reports on television or receive emergency calls to their home, board up your windows, what to do when we switch from prep to recovery afterwards. So it was very, very crucial information. With a text message, you're limited to how many characters you can do, but with the Nixle system, you can put a clickable tiny link at the end of each email that opens up what we refer to as the full message or the web message, which can hold up to 20,000 characters, maps, images, documents, any sort of recovery information. So they mobilized quickly, got the word out, built that user base, out of necessity with less than 24 hours to go before the storm hit, and they did push out to Twitter and Facebook. They did do emails. They really blanketed the area through that multimodal communication. Once you have those opt-ins, like Florida got, like Captain Ryan got in South Brunswick, sending out a message is really simple. You do it, if you're familiar with our page, you do it all from one page user interface. Write your message, choose all of your modes that it's going to go out: text, email, web, voice, social media, and hit send. And it's near instantaneous. I will jump into the system in a moment to show that to you. You can also, if you're out on the road, if you're seeing the trees down situations blocking these roads, or wires down, and your officers or your crews are not in the bunker, you also have our app, which is known as the Everbridge app, where you can send your messages from as well. So whether you do it online or you do it from a dedicated app, if you have not downloaded the app and you use Nixle, I definitely encourage you to go to the Apple Store or to the Android Store and download the Everbridge app. As you can see on the side here, just a couple more slides before I show you the actual live page. Captain Ryan talked about partnerships. He specifically mentioned the Google partnership. For those of you who aren't familiar with this, Nixle does have a partnership with Google Public Alerts. And what that essentially means is that any alert that you send out through Nixle, be it a text message, be it an email, be it something you're pushing to Twitter and Facebook, it also gets sent to Google's Public Alerts team. What they do is they basically parse through the information, and if it fits into a certain criteria that they allow on their website, and it's usually dangerous situations. It's storms, it's hurricanes, it's blizzards, it's tornadoes, it's missing children, it's wanted, dangerous suspects. What happens is, just by you writing that message and sending it out to your subscriber, whether you have 1 subscriber or 1 million subscribers, it will show up on Google's homepage at the top of their search results when someone goes to Google to find out more information. So if we were at the height of Hurricane Matthew and someone living in Florida typed Matthew in Google Public Alerts, not only would they see anything from the local news stations and the CNN reports, but above that, taking real estate at the top of the page, is your Nixle notification that they can then click on and that'll take them to your information. So they may not live in your neck of the woods. They may, as I said before, have a relative there, or maybe the storm is heading up towards them and they want to get some information. They're going to get it right from you and not through a third-party news source. And that's for Google search results, Google Maps, as well as the Google Now app on Android and Apple phones as well. So it's a partnership that we really value, that we really prize. It's been in place since about 2012. And if you do use Nixle and you have sent out an alert, a red level alert message, there's a good chance that it also appeared on Google's homepage as well. And at the end of the day, our system is really about keeping communities safe and informed. This is why we do what we do. When we do see that our messages have helped mitigate a disaster or reunited a family where a child's been missing, or maybe put someone behind bars who has been on the run. This is why we do what we do. I wanted to actually jump into the system for a second. Let me see if I can switch over here. Mitch, I may need you to take control from me and give it back to me again so I can kind of switch what I'm sharing.
Sure.
Okay. So you should be seeing my Google Chrome window right now, everyone. When you log into the system, again, if you're familiar with this, I'm hoping it's a refresher. And if you have any questions, please, let me know. But when you log into the system, the sort of nerve center of Nixle resides in the message center and the groups. It does a lot. It does a lot more than we're getting into today. But the idea is that when you get set up with Nixle, we work on the concept of zip codes, and we map zip codes to your agency. So when someone opts in by texting their zip code, you'll automatically get them opted into what we call the Nixle Wire group, which is the main group here. So if you lived in Nicetown and there's one zip code in Nicetown, anyone who texts that zip code 888-777 will now be part of your contacts. If you have 10 zip codes or 100 zip codes, we map that in the back end of our system too. So no matter who texts what, it'll go to the appropriate agency. And like I said, if someone shares that zip code, like a municipal level, county level, state level, it'll go to all three or more, but always official public safety agencies. At the same time, you can create your groups. Here you can see I have a whole bunch of groups. This is just a demo account. There's a whole bunch of groups here that you can create just by easily clicking on Create New Group. Give it a name. We'll call it Demo Test. You can assign it a keyword if you'd like, and we'll just call it Demo Test 1. It'll let you know if the keyword is available. If it's not, it means someone else is using it, because the keyword does need to be unique. And if someone else is using it, you just have to get a little creative. And then once you create the group, that group is active, that group is public, and that keyword is public. So anyone who was to text Demo Test 1 to 888-777, you now have their cell phone number, and you can send them a text message, and you can send them some follow-up information saying, thank you for subscribing, to fill out your full profile, including home number, email address, location. You can go to nixle.com and complete that profile. But at the very least, you have their cell phone. Once you've created your group, and once you've started building in those opt-ins through promoting the system, hopefully well ahead of any crisis, but definitely as a crisis, comes up the bend, then it's as simple as going over to the message center and crafting your message. We give alert type levels that really function as a visual cue as to how critical the message is. You might want to click advisory. Here's where my typing isn't the best, but write your text here. You can write your email and your web message here. You may want to make it the same as your SMS. Here you have up to 20,000 characters, and can and can embed YouTube videos. You can, as I said, attach images, maps, PDFs, Word documents, whatever you have. If you have the ability to do voice dialing, you can open that up here as well. That is one of our packages that lets you also pre-record your message to ring cell phones and landlines as well. And then any groups that you've created, public group or private group, we sort of have a duality in our system. You can send a message publicly so anyone can see it, or you can send it privately just for your eyes only. It's usually reserved for, internal staff within your department or within your city. The private messages do not create a web viewable link, so no one can click over to any web viewable content. You can even target your message either to everyone, or you can say, hey, I just want people within a certain polygon within my area who've opted in to receive that message. We give you a few tools to do that, either the custom area targeting, or you can do a simpler point and radius on a map where you can pull it from 0 down to a specific address out to 10 miles. And then you can either send your message now, schedule it for future delivery, and post simultaneously to Twitter and to Facebook. So from this one page, again, you're sending a text message, you're sending an email, you're posting it to the web. You could very well be ringing phones with a pre-recorded message up to 5 minutes long. You're targeting your groups. You can even target it geographically if you want to get, do a little more of a narrow focus, or you can just hit everyone. You can schedule it for the future and, make it recurring. And you can push it out to Twitter and to Facebook, all in one message. It could take you maybe 30 seconds to reach thousands of people through half a dozen different modalities and to get that message out. Time and time again, we see our messages, as we look at that one screen on some Nixle success stories, mitigating and helping in disasters like Hurricane Sandy and Irene along the Jersey Shore, and in areas like South Brunswick, along Florida with Hurricane Matthew, the Oroville Dam in California recently, wildfires, and tornadoes in Texas. So, Mitch, that's what I have. Hopefully I gave you guys a good, peek into the system. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take them, or Captain Ryan on, his experiences with what he presented earlier. Thank you, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Jim. So now, as promised, we will answer any questions that anyone had. So our first question is actually for Captain Ryan. So Captain Ryan, did you do any promoting before the storm to try and gain opt-ins, and did you do anything regularly before a major storm that you would do to try and gain opt-ins?
We work with our partners in the community, both our schools and our religious institutions, to try to advertise Nixle as a primary method of information. And during Hurricane Sandy, our opt-ins grew by 88% in a 10-day time period. From just before the storm to about 5 days after the storm, it grew by 88%. In Hurricane Irene, we had a similar growth. We had a 27% increase in a 5-day period when Hurricane Irene hit the area. Whenever there's a weather event, large scale, especially because we're caught between two metropolitan areas, people want local information. They want to know what's going on, what we're doing. And so we find it usually successful by partnering with the schools, people who already have their own databases, and saying, hey, this is how we'll get information for you. So by partnering with them in advance of any kind of storm or weather event, their database will have the Nixle as the official information and be able to get that information out quicker.
Thank you, Captain Ryan. Next question is for you, Jim Gata. So you mentioned you can send over email and text. Are there any other contact paths you can use, say, for elderly people who may not have cell phones or computers?
Yeah, absolutely. So especially in the case of elderly folks who may live, alone, or maybe in a senior center, or even younger folks who may be a little more rural and maybe the cell phone signal's not that strong. Voice messaging, even though, in this day and age, it is true, landlines are sort of going the way of the dinosaur a little bit. They are decreasing. It's not what it was 30 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. But it's still, landlines are still a very viable source of information, especially as the questioner was alluding to with senior citizens. So yeah, just to kind of go over those paths again. Text and mobile app are easily the most popular these days. Anyone who has kids, teenagers, and high school, and my son is 9 years old and he's constantly on apps and texting. That's definitely the most popular, the best way to get out to folks, because you're basically going to where they spend their time. You're living in their world by texting, by doing the app. Voice, email, you can't really downplay how important it is to also push out to social media. Social media is a double-edged sword. Twitter and Facebook, they're great. Everyone's on them. You have to be on them in this day and age. There is a little clutter where, there's a lot of clutter with them. So when you're sending out an important message about, this storm or that tornado, it's gonna compete a little bit with pictures of, your kid's birthday party or, whatever, grandma's retirement. But it's important to put it out there. So you have text, you have email, you have voice, you have social media, you have web postings, and you have the app. You have about half a dozen modalities that you can and should send out to, especially if it's an emergency, and Nixle does support all of them.
Thanks, Jim. Next question is for Captain Ryan. So you mentioned that a good practice is to tell your residents when you'll be sending out messages. Do you have any suggestions as to how many messages you should send a day, as to avoid fatiguing your residents with too many messages or sending out too few messages? Do you have any sort of suggestions about that?
Yeah, so I've traveled around the state and parts of the country where it depends on your local information source. If you're inundated in Northeast with different data and information all the time coming out, what I find in our community, it's good to have maybe 3 to 4 messages a week on different things, on any kind of traffic-related incidents. But you also have to gauge it. As much as Nixle is pushing out information, we get a lot of emails from my contact information at the bottom where people give us feedback. So in one of the neighboring communities, they were putting out a lot of information almost too many times where people were complaining that it's too much traffic information. So they scaled it back a little bit and it became more accommodating. I think listening to your residents, I think having 3 to 4 messages a week develops as a viable source for accurate information, and a long-term relationship will build up that way. So again, developing that communication platform, I'm going to send out 3 messages a week on whatever's going on in the local community, and then I'm going to also listen to hear the feedback. As one of the interesting conversations when we first started Nixle was there was a decision about budget cuts, and the local governing body said, "Have you seen your Nixle?" Nixle is, kept them in touch with what we knew we were doing every day. The local governing body saw it and saw the value of the information we were sharing and said, we can't do anything with the local police department. They're so busy. So it's going to take time for you to adjust. But I think 3 messages a week is a good start.
And Mitch, if I can also jump in on that for a second, you'll definitely see if you're sending too much, especially if they're text messages, you will, chances are you'll see your numbers start to go down a little bit, because people may think like, this is too much, information. My phone's blowing up daily with text messages. So yeah, just to reiterate what Captain Ryan said, it's really knowing that rhythm of your community. Now, there are some communities that send a lot of emails. They say, hey, this is not critical information, but we're not going to bother anyone if we're sending an email a day, let's say, on certain things that are happening in our community improvement projects, but they will reserve the text messaging for once a week, a couple times a week, or maybe just for some of the more critical events. So it's just kind of knowing your community.
Mitch, one other follow-up is there's other agencies that set up groups, so it's target specific information. So if you want to just target elementary schools, or you want to target businesses with a crime alert about, let's say, liquor stores in your community, hey, there's a shoplifter or suspect, you can target them, and therefore your message will be more effective. But to send out to general all the time, as you become more accustomed and tailor your message, it'll be more effective for the person receiving it.
Awesome, thank you guys. Sort of to build off that last question, Captain Ryan, do you have examples of what kind of groups you have besides like businesses or maybe internal groups? Do you have examples of people you would classify together into a group?
Yeah, so we had, during the storms, there's a whole group of visiting nurses that would help us with our shelters. So we established a group for them. We can also have it for pharmaceutical companies. Pharmaceutical companies, if there's some kind of specific industrial areas just adjacent to the major turnpike exit. So things that might specifically target those areas, that's where we can group them into that. And we find a lot better response when it's targeted information. Now, generally, we send out most of the crime alerts or crime news goes out to everyone. People are very interested in what's going on in their communities every day, from burglaries to thefts to anything of more significance. And so we send out a general, but if we can target a message more towards traffic area stuff, when we're, hey, this highway's going to be closed, well, that's one end of our community. It's not impacting the whole community. We want to let them, that area know, those residents know this road's going to be closed for a period of time. So that's how we kind of group it.
And Mitch, if I can also just kind of jump on that for a second, one example that I love about one agency who got really creative with their groups, and they had dozens of groups besides, you know, sort of like their main Nixle wire zip code notifications. They had a big group in town of dog walkers who would get together every night and be at the local dog parks and whatnot. And they actually had a group just for them that they would send messages out to about, you know, having that extra set of eyes in the field. Like, you know, if you've seen this person we're looking for, here's a picture of them. And they've actually cracked some cases and gotten some good tips from their dog walkers groups, of which there's dozens of people. Small town, but, you know, a big sort of like interest group there.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, guys. Next question is for you, Jim Gatta. So you mentioned people opt in via zip code, but some people might live in one zip code and work in another one. Can you opt into multiple zip codes, and if so, how many can you opt into?
Yeah, you absolutely. You can have as many zip codes as you want. I mean, I live in the Philadelphia area, and I'm opted into many towns that I drive through to get where I'm going to, you know, my kids' school or various work meetings. I also am opted in to where we have some of our offices in San Francisco and LA and Boston. You can create as many profiles as you want. You can opt into as many locations as you want. You can opt into a location temporarily if you live in Minneapolis and you're vacationing in Dallas next week. You can say, hey, I'm going to text a Dallas zip code because I want to get any information that's going on in that area, you know, in Fort Worth, because I'm going to be there for 4 days. So you can have as many as you want. Opting out is just as easy as opting in. If you text your zip code 888-777, you can opt out just by texting stop to 888-777. If you're opted into multiple zip codes or multiple groups, what our system will do is just send you a text back saying, what do you want to stop? You know, here's the zip code you're opted into. Here's the groups you're opted into. Do you want to stop all? Stop just some of them? So you can have as many as you want. And that is a very common use case. You know, business travelers who go from point A to point B regularly. Someone who has an uncle in, Detroit and wants to keep an eye out there. No limit to how many locations you're opted into. And you can do it from your phone, or you can do it online at nixle.com.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. Next question is for Captain Ryan. So Jim mentioned that there are 3 different types of alerts, right? There's the alert, there's the incident, and there's community. In the instance of like Hurricane Sandy, where it's a intense scenario, would you consider all the messages you sent out to be alerts, or do you still use these 3 different alert types to keep for certain incidences during the storm?
The alert, the highest one, we reserve for almost very limited circumstances, because when we want it to go out, we want it to have the most impact. So during the storm, when it first hit and the power was lost in the entire community and most of the state, we send it out that way. After one, everyone was sent out with advisory. Advisory offers both the SMS message and the email messaging, And I believe, and Jim Gatta will say, the majority of messages sent out through Nixle are through advisory. It gets the reach that you need, and you really hold off on that high alert until the extreme situation. The community messages will go with the lowest possible one, and it'll be different. We won't have the same reach as far as the SMS. But Jim Gatta, I think, can talk about what the traditional, what's used.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So if you saw those three priority levels, it was community, advisory, and alert. Most of them fall between the community and advisory. Probably a good 85% of messages that go throughout there are one of those two. Alerts, just like Captain Ryan said, are reserved really for more critical information. And keep in mind that it's the alerts, it's the red level alerts that get pushed over to Google as well. So we don't, any of the lesser like community messages, I shouldn't call them lesser, but less critical community messages, they don't go to Google. So if you send out a community message about a storm surge and flooding, that does not go to Google. It's the alert one. So if you want to tap into their system and their, billions of eyeballs, make sure that you send it out as an alert, but make sure that it is legitimately an urgent, critical message. But yeah, I would say maybe 10% of our messages are alerts. The vast majority are advisory and community.
Thanks, guys. So we're almost out of time, so I'm only ask a few more questions. This one's for Captain Ryan. So you mentioned that you like to do, you have to keep contact info up to date for groups that you communicate with during storms like this. Do you have a particular method for ensuring that all the contact info in there is up to date, like routine testing or that sort of thing?
Yeah, so one thing we do with any big event, we create a communication plan for that event, and the communication plan makes sure that we reach out to our partners in the previous events. If there's any new partners that came in, the developments that are built into our township, we'll make sure we have those contacts and we just revisit those numbers. It might be personal, just simply calling. The other thing that I want to bring up is we also switch over our media partners. We made all our media partners also move over to this. We told them that Nixle will be the official way for them to get press releases or anything like that. So all those partners are also following us. They don't get an individual press release. They get our Nixle message, say follow us here, and they get the same way. So, but mainly just updating them in advance of the storm, maybe on a yearly basis when we revisit our OEM annexes and look at what that is. We go back and make sure the contacts are accurate.
Awesome. Thanks, Captain Ryan. So that is just about all the time we have. I also want to thank everyone who registered and came to this webinar. I also want to say thank you to Captain Ryan and Jim for great presentations. With that, I say everyone, thank you for coming and have a nice day.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care.